Hey, over last summer, the topic that we used at the Perform Better Functional Training Summit was really going back to lateralizations and regressions and really unwrapping everything that those words mean in the training equals rehab model. It was also really interesting because those words are also, particularly lateralizations, are a big part of certified functional strength coach. And the foundation of where they took lateralizations came from what we did in originally discussed in T equals R2. So I've got some things on the board that would almost be somewhat of an addendum to one of the major concepts, which when things boil down, yeah, it is cool to have a big catalog. It's important to have a big catalog of lateralizations and regressions. So you have your exercise that you want to do. And if for whatever reason you can't execute, and there's a lot of different reasons, some of them have nothing to do with the body. If you want to do a barbell deadlift and you don't have a barbell, you have to lateralize to something else that does something very, very similar, if not the same. So lateralization is something that you do instead. And if you can't do that, then you'll try to find the gap. And if it is movement related, the regression, because you're really not getting fit. You're going backwards a little bit so that you can go forwards. In that barbell deadlift, you need ankle mobility to get the bar off the floor, so we'll do some kind of ankle mobility piece. That's the general concept of lateralizations and regressions, but it's all driven from a single concept of if joints can get into the right positions to absorb and adapt to stress. If you do not have the requisite ankle dorsiflexion to pull the bar off the floor, well, then you can do a rack pull, where you can still train the posterior chain with the same perspective that you would off the floor. You're just going to use something else that doesn't potentially and negatively exploit what you can't do well yet, which is get all the way down to the floor, because your knees move great, your hips move great, but the ankles don't dorsiflex very well, even if you put on Olympic lifting shoes with a heel. So this whole concept of the keen movement evaluation starts to unravel where you go with your A plan, the exercises that you want to do, and then where you might lateralize, and then where you might regress. The movement evaluation can sometimes seem very strange because it might demonstrate things that don't matter. Do they not matter ever? Do they not matter to the exercises that you want to do? So when we talk about the movement evaluation, it only has perspective when you know what you want to do, when you know what your training program is. Coach, hey, do you think it would be a good idea if we made sure that all of the joints that you need for so-and-so to sprint well, don't you think it'd be a good idea if we looked at those joints before you sprinted, just so you had an idea of how you might coach, how you might succeed, or how you might not succeed? And most coaches are going to say, hopefully, that's a pretty good idea. I don't know why it wouldn't be a good idea, because one of the goals of this perspective of the keen movement evaluation is that if you don't succeed in your training, it's not because the joints can't get in the right position. It was because there was too much load. It was too heavy. The work to rest ratio. They just did not appreciate yet the motor skill acquisition of a complex training method. All of these things are things that the coach can manipulate. They can go left, they can go right, they can figure it out. But a lot of times when joints are not able to even get in the right position under any circumstances, there's significant stiffness that is not consistent with how you want to coach the movement. Sometimes you need to bring in a therapist. When there's pain, now sometimes you can move very, very well in terms of an exercise when there's pain, but ultimately pain is a governor on how you should expect the system to react. It has to integrate this other non-desirable thing that probably doesn't contribute to the ideal adaptation. Again, a therapist would probably be a good partner, and anything that we do in Training Equals Rehab, in this case lateralizations and regressions, is always meant to look for reasons to tag out, to look for reasons to work with other people. That's the concept of where the movement evaluation fits. You can only add perspective to those results and the data you generate from whatever can joints get in the right positions type of evaluation you want to use. Not how strong they are, not how fit they are, not what their physiology is telling you that day. This is all very important, but probably in a lower chronology. Everything is important, but there's an order, because if you can't even get into the position once, you're not comfortable with how often they can get in the position because maybe they can fight their way through it, through stiffness, but then under fatigue, you don't think. You decide this. Of course, you might adopt a model that is commercially driven, that has a manual that says to do it this way. Guess what? You're allowed to do it your way, particularly after you have dominated, owned, and created excellence with the commercial way. Once you know the rules, then break the rules. So you can always decide how you want to use something because it's you. Like, you don't have to do it the way someone else said after you've already done it. I think that's the best way. Do it the way somebody else says and then try to crack it if you find it. Because if somebody else has done it better than you, I don't know why you would want to crack it, insist on cracking it, or doing it some other way. Now, if what they're giving you is garbage, and that's for you to decide, not me, not someone else, well, then you can crack it sooner or just throw it in the trash. But at the end of the day, can joints get in the right positions to absorb and adapt to stress? For the exercises that you need, you have to then decide the exercises, and then you can decide how you want to coach it. I might suggest that that is not a great way to coach that exercise. I would coach it differently. You're allowed to do what you want to do, but we do have to have that standardized, at least in your mind. Hopefully you'd write it down or put it on a whiteboard, but it has to be standardized, and then we can all use a very similar movement evaluation that understands that if I have this, then my potential success is not going to be a problem. Because joints can't get in the right positions. I can go out and coach motor skills. I can coach endurance. I probably can't coach significant mobility restriction, and I can't coach something that's in pain, okay? Maybe there could be unique environments where active exercise is a part of those solutions, but you don't know, because you don't know what pain is. And when the stiffness is significant, you're going to have to change the exercises. You're going to have to change your technical skill coaching if somebody can't even do what you think the best way to do it is, because there's always going to be more than one way. It may limit power output. It may limit distance on your golf swing. But that is going to be a crucial reason as to why you work with someone else. Now, let's look at this movement evaluation concept. Now, what I have here, I have relatively eight different buckets that we're going to look at, okay? But they only make sense when we picked exercises. So we're going to look at the split squat, we're going to look at the front squat, the pull-up, and sprinting. Of course, there's redundancy through all of those. They're all useful general physical preparedness, basic choices. But there are some differences, and those differences will show us that your keen movement evaluation might be complete garbage in some areas, but you can still use the exercises that you want to do, or you can change them. You can change and lateralize into something that they can do that delivers something similar. At the end of the day, do I really believe that a front squat and a back squat are so fundamentally different that they live on two different planets? I don't think that's the answer. Clearly they're different. Clearly load carriage is different. Clearly the demands on the upper extremity is different. That being said, if we broke it down, we're doing it for lower body strength, lower body explosiveness, vertical thrust, ground force reaction. There's probably 9 other things you could say, but the back squat and the front squat with both fit. And then when you say back squat and front squat, well then when does it stop? What about Zercher squat? What about double kettlebell front squat? What about goblet squat? What about trap bar jump? What about Olympic lifts? They all start to find that everything is a cousin when you look at things as to what is the adaptation that you're using this vehicle for. All right. So when we look at this list here, and if it looks familiar, you know where we're going here. We talked about over the summer that there's different ways to evaluate. I can put you on a table and move every joint passively. I think that's a decent way. It is how I used to do it until I learned a commercial model. Now, if I look at that, I'm going to miss a couple things. It's going to take me forever, okay? Probably takes between 18 and 22 minutes. It is not 100% passive. You can look at active versus passive in this unloaded position. And there are a couple tests that you can run where somebody is supine, you roll them on one side, you roll them prone, you roll them on the other side. It's very systematic in the order in which you do it. There are a couple where we look at the hip and trunk and cull out, is this more of a hip strength or a core sequencing or even core strength issue. So there's a way to do that. We showed you that over the summer. It takes a long time. You're also going to miss compression that may yield pain. Now, hopefully you'll find that when you're training and you'll make the changes that are appropriate. However, I kind of want to see that first, because if I am too aggressive, and I have no idea, neither do you, how aggressive is aggressive. Body weight might be too aggressive with something in the knee that simply doesn't show up when we're prone, okay? So that is not a bad way, but you will definitely miss some things, and you're certainly going to miss the opportunities to see if maybe I don't need to do any of this, because if I look at things in standing and start there, single repetition body weight, vertical in most movements, I then don't need to move on. I can then chop minutes off of my evaluation and get into training and get into the things that are going to be more useful rather than just learning how to unfold the map. Doesn't mean it's not important, it just means it has to come first. So first, we're going to look at changing levels in stance. And those positions will be one of these 3, okay? Only one of them will have perspective unless the movement is dynamic where you're changing positions. So we're going to look at double leg symmetrical stance, deadlift and squat, things we've already mentioned, military press, double asymmetrical, so now one foot is in front of the other, so that's where our split squat, and there's a whole host of can joints get in the right positions that we'll learn, as well as single leg stance. So we probably only need one. If there's a transition, then we'll need 2. But ultimately, this is they all stand on their own, where can joints get in the right positions in a double asymmetrical stance may not have carryover to a double symmetrical stance. Your feet, different positions. Obviously, there's different mechanics. There's certainly different proprioception. The sequencing on how someone might organize their motor skills might be different. And how the floor speaks north and how you speak south to the floor, when you change levels, it could be different. The one thing that's always the same is ankles. If you're changing levels, we always care about ankle dorsiflexion. So ankle dorsiflexion is something that we should be aware of for nearly all movements where you're on the ground, okay? Even if you're standing and doing a strict military press, we might have it. We should certainly we're going to evaluate the same for everybody. But at some point, if that military press becomes a push press, not because you tried, but because you were executing rep 9 and 10 as instructed, and you get a little dip, I want to know that if that dip fails, or if I do something in the lumbar spine, I need to know that that was the reason why that happened, not because it was a fitness issue and I just had too many wheels on the bar. We're going to look at reaching in your arms. We'll look at reaching in your legs. And then we'll look at trunk control in the sagittal plane and in the transverse plane. If we look at the transverse plane, we should, maybe not always, but should be picking up anything that might be useful for us in the frontal plane. Okay? There's a lot, the control and or movement of the vertebrae in rotation is very, very similar to what happens in the frontal plane in side bending. So what we're going to do is run a little test here where when we look at how we want to coach the split squat, we'll get a bit more granular, and then we're going to put little X's. And we'll start to put your keen movement evaluation, not the one you're doing on the table, the one that you're going to do vertical with 1 repetition of body weight. Because you don't want to use fatigue. You don't want to use load. Because if they can't do it, how do you know if they could never do it and they were so stiff or in pain, or they just couldn't do it because they adopted a different motor strategy because they were too tired or they was too heavy? So you do both. You do movement first, and then you add these other components of complexity, because if you do everything complex first, make it as simple as needed, but no simpler. Okay, so now let's go into what we're trying to see when we look at a split squat. All right, number 1. Which strategy are we using? So this is just a split squat where we start with right foot forward, left foot back, and we're going to use dumbbells at the side. Dumbbells at the side. Here's the way we think of this. If I didn't have an ability to do any one of these things, would I see a problem? Would I expect to see a problem if I did a split squat? So for instance, let's start with something easy. I said we're holding dumbbells down by your side. If someone couldn't reach over their head, and that's a very important thing to do. We know that everybody should be able to reach over their head. That's not the question we're asking here. That's a different question. The question we're asking here is that if somebody couldn't reach over their head, could they still hold dumbbells down by their sides? And the answer is yes. So we are not going to be putting a little X here. We are going to be putting an X here. So we need to learn about changing levels in a double asymmetrical stance. We need to understand about the forward leg having hip flexion, the forward leg having knee flexion, and the forward foot having dorsiflexion, because we're going to say we're coaching the split squat with an angled tibia. If you insisted on coaching the split squat with a vertical tibia, you would not require dorsiflexion. So on the front leg, we do need dorsiflexion and everything else that we mentioned. On the back leg, we need hip extension. Check. Because if we're changing levels, we're going to have to see hip extension to your standard. How do you want to coach it? Forward lean, whatever you want to do. Arch your back, throw your neck into the next county. You decide how to coach. Next, we need knee flexion with hip extension. That's different than knee flexion with hip flexion. The rectus femoris is on slack in flexion. It is highly tensioned in extension. But now we need the foot, because when your foot's on the floor, the rear leg needs dorsiflexion, but it also needs big toe extension. If you don't have big toe extension, you are going to significantly struggle with a split squat. So you do need to look at the toes. If we say big toe, of course, that probably also means the smaller toes. But if the big toe doesn't go, then the whole thing is screwed. So when you look at changing levels of double asymmetrical stance, not only are you looking at dorsiflexion, you're also getting toe action. If you set a good standard, your standard, whatever you say good is, for double asymmetrical stance, you will be looking at the toes. You have to look at the toes on the rear leg. Of course, we're going to look at both sides. We do not need arm reaching. When we do we need leg reaching? Yes, if one leg is forward and one leg is back, I need to know at what standard or what quality can someone flex one hip and extend the other. So we're interested in here. Do we need to control the trunk forward and back? We already mentioned arching your back and throwing your neck into the next county. How will you test that? You can decide, but we do need it. And when one leg is forward and one leg is back, inherently anything asymmetrical will have a rotary or an anti-rotary component. We need this. But you don't need this. And we don't need these. So you can probably perform very limitedly or even poorly on arm motion if I am doing split squats with arms down by my side. So you do need some level of comprehensiveness in order to believe that if you do split squats, you only want to fail because you programmed it poorly from your acute variables. You don't want to fail because they can't even do it in the first place. So if someone didn't have the toes, well, maybe you could do rear foot elevated split squat, but that's harder because you're getting less action from the back leg. So maybe then you hold on to a TRX or even the side of the rack or half field to use some external assistance from your upper extremity. That's a lateralization, because at the end of the day, you are training relatively front leg and you're doing so in this split stance because that's what you valued. Lateralizations and regressions and the key movement evaluation doesn't mean much if you don't have a strong opinion on what exercises you think are going to be successful. So we broke down split squat, and we probably could have gotten that information maximum 10 minutes versus the double the time on the table, and we would still be missing some things in terms of skill. We would be missing some things in terms of pain resulting from compression, particularly of the knee. So now, let's go to front squat. Front squat, we definitely care about ankles, and we care about double symmetrical. I do not care to do front squat of double asymmetrical, and even though you're walking, I'm not counting walking the bar out of the rack, so we're not going to use that. But if you want to get that granular, you're not wrong. You will need higher levels of competency, let's just say you're using a monolift or a front squat, which we don't see very often. Now, here's the thing. The big part of double asymmetrical is hip extension, okay? Hip hyperextension more so than extension. You do need to finish at extended at the top. But if someone didn't have great toe or the little toes extension, hyperextension, they probably still look okay when they split squat. If you don't agree, then you need more levels of competency. I think that you can do a front squat as long as you have dorsiflexion. I don't think you need big toe motion. It won't screw up the motion. It won't screw up the squat. It will screw up a whole bunch of other things. It won't screw up the squat. So now I'm holding the bar in the rack. Now I do need to learn about the arms, because we have significant shoulder, we have significant elbow, and significant wrist action. All of that would fit into arm reaching, okay? Do I care about leg reaching? Yes. Anytime I'm doing something that's lower body centric, I'm always going to care about leg reaching. As I'm in the front squat, do I care about sagittal plane control of my spine, either creating or preventing flexion and extension? Yes. Do I care about rotation? No, I do not. This is a completely sagittal movement. So I may be able to perform limitedly in rotation control or creation of trunk rotation. So now the front squat is significantly comprehensive. However, what if I didn't have the arms? Well, I probably can't do a back squat because I also need arm reaching. But if I did a goblet squat or a kettlebell front squat, again, crucial to have mobility everywhere and have stability everywhere. But for someone that didn't have great motion through their wrists for whatever reason, what else can they do to achieve the same things that the front squat can achieve? Maybe not as well, maybe not as quickly, maybe not as aggressively, but if you do a kettlebell goblet squat or a dumbbell goblet squat or even a Zercher squat, you can have significantly limited shoulder motion and still look really, really good with that type of technique. So that's again the lateralization. And your regression would be whatever you're not doing well. You got to mobilize the shoulder, you got to mobilize the elbow, soft tissue, joint, neurolock, whatever whatever level of your evaluation takes you there. Okay, so now let's look at the pull-up. So now things get a little bit easier because there is no stance. You could have all sorts of knee pain, in my opinion. Now, if you're going to coach a tactical pull-up with dorsiflexion, I don't even think you need good dorsiflexion. You just need to use the dorsiflexion to irradiate that abdominal hollow technique. You could have miserable dorsiflexion and still look great doing a tactical pull-up. You could have miserable hip mobility. Your knee could be blown up from a total knee replacement 3 days ago, and in theory, you should still be able to do a great-looking pull-up. Do we need arm reaching? Yes. Do we need leg reaching? We do not. Do we need flexion and extension? Yes. And if you suck at it, we can just make this movement unloaded. We can give you a band or use some kind of method to deload this, because if you can just stand straight and tighten your bottom, you will have in my opinion, ideal technique for the pull-up. Do we need sagittal? Do we need rotational? No, you don't. So now you could have a relatively poor movement evaluation and still do pull-ups. Because is there really such a thing as a poor movement evaluation? No. It's just answering questions. It's not good or bad. It's just what it is. Then if you move forward and it's not consistent with some type of thought process like this, then you're going to call it poor. But it's not poor because if you're just running pull-ups all week because that's what you want to do, then you don't need a very comprehensive movement results. You do need to do it to find out, to make sure you have the most important one. Now let's look at sprinting, which is a transition, okay? So in that one, we're always going to need dorsiflexion, okay? Obviously, if we have that forward lean, we definitely care about dorsiflexion. But now, do we care about double symmetrical? Is that ever really happening? Let's just say no, okay? But certainly, we will need to understand the big toe, everything from the split squat, and now single leg stance, because as there is a recovery phase on one side, the other side is in swing, meaning if one leg is off the ground, then the other one is on the ground, that is double asymmetrical. And then there is a point where both legs are off the ground, and that would be somewhat of a jumping pattern where 2 feet lands on 2 feet, or a leaping pattern where you go off 1 foot and then land on the other foot. All of those things happen out of a double asymmetrical stance. So that's why we care about that one, even though there's high redundancy. High redundancy doesn't mean they're exactly the same. Somebody might have great sequencing in double leg and have dorsiflexion, but miserable sequencing in double asymmetrical. Do we care about arm reaching in our sprinting technique? The answer is clearly yes. Do we care about legs? Yes. Do we care about forward back, sagittal control? Yes. Do we care about the rotation? Absolutely. That's what running is. Running is controlled rotation, okay? And ultimately now we need a lot more competency from our movement evaluation to expect sprinting to yield the most efficient economy, the most efficient return on investment. Doesn't mean you can't sprint. Doesn't mean anything is off limits. It's just so that you know what you're getting when you get into this investment into training. Okay, so we looked at 4 different things and we looked at these different values. Are there others? There may be. I don't think so, but you can run the same thought process. Now, here's the clincher. Okay, here's how to do this. If somebody has very, very ideal simple movement strategies that are unabated, this should take just over 6 minutes. If somebody is really, really limited and you have to look at the same pattern multiple different ways, change positions, eliminate joints, active versus passive, then it might take up to 12 minutes. It could double your time, 12 minutes. But the way to do this, you're always going to look at ankles in the standing position But then if I just change colors here, if you did know what I was talking about, you have the deep squat, you have the inline lunge, you have the hurdle step, you have shoulder mobility, you have active straight leg raise, you have trunk stability push-up, and you have rotary stability. This is the functional movement screen. The data that you generate from the functional movement screen can only be of high value when you know what you want to do. And then you start to see there's no such thing as a good score or a bad score. There's only scores that yield meaningful information to the exercises that you want to do. If you have an incredibly minimalist program, which might be the best program possible for the people that you're serving, you may find that somebody else would call it a bad movement screen, but in fact it's perfect, it's brilliant, it's excellent, because all you're going to do is pull-ups and all you're going to do is farmer's walks. So you have a different perspective now, and I really do hope that somebody had no idea what I was talking about and had a potentially negative or condescending approach towards using the functional movement screen. Is this the way you saw it in the manual? Probably not. Have you heard it this way before? If you didn't hear it from me, probably not. That's okay, because if you don't do this, there's other ways to get it done. I find this to be the most effective, the most efficient for individuals that are not in pain, because at the end of the day, using these 7 movements as well as an ankle dorsiflexion appraisal is the best way, not the only way, but in my opinion the best way to determine can joints get in the right positions to absorb and adapt to stress. It's kind of a hollow statement unless you continue to report for what exercises and how you want to coach those exercises. Don't get stuck into what someone else wants you to do. What exercises do they want you to do? How do they want you to coach it? What do you know about biology, physics, neurology, and physiology, so you can decide what is the best way to coach. Now, at the end of the day, the best way might be just do what somebody else says in the beginning. Let's see what the results are, and then you move on from there. That's what I have done here. This is something that maybe I crafted and melded and bent to make sense to me. But it's all the same. We're just kind of breaking it apart and putting it back together a little bit differently that works for your context, the type of people you work with, the type of exercises that you want to do. So, is it flawless? If you put it into the right perspective, it's a lot closer to flawless than faulty. Because you can't go wrong here if you then just understand what are the exercises you want to do, how do you want to coach it, what joint positions do you need, and then what is the quickest and most efficient way to learn about every joint from a general preparation. These will not work if you're looking at baseball or golf or something that requires more motion, which then requires more control than what we see in general training. I don't know any exercises, doesn't mean I know everyone, but I don't know any exercise that happens in the gym that you cannot identify here, 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 here. We should be able to put anything we want up here and run this, and you should be able to rattle it off. You should then be able to change some of these exercises to do relatively the same thing. Nothing is exactly the same, relatively the same thing, and hide a little bit, or minimize the demand of something you don't do well from a joint level. Maybe you can't squat as heavy as you want, not because your legs are not in great position to adapt. You can't hold the bar up here. So you hold the bar somewhere else, and all of a sudden you're able to develop lower body strength. Now, if you're a power lifter, not an option. But if we're just training for general population or for sports where we're just using vehicles that we think translate, at some point, even if we do think a back squat translates more than a Zercher squat, if you can't get into the right positions, at best, you'll have a lower response in my opinion, and at worst, you might be adding to some kind of injury mechanism. That's my opinion, and this is why we should be using something like this that gets us this information as quickly as possible. And if we ever find that leprechaun up in the tree, we're going to give him a functional movement screen too.